The Kalahari did not care about Rena Mofokeng, and Rena had made peace with that a long time ago. She had been a soldier once, a combat medic with the South African National Defense Force, deployed to places where the ground was always red, and the screaming never really stopped, even after the guns went quiet. She had seen things that carved themselves into her skull, like letters into stone. She had held men together with her bare hands, while helicopters took too long to arrive. She had watched friends die in dust that looked exactly like the dust back home. When she came back, she did not go home. She went to the edge of the Kalahari, and she took a job at a wildlife rehabilitation center, and she told herself that animals were easier than people. Animals did not lie. Animals did not betray their own kind for money or land or pride. Animals simply were what they were, and Rena respected that more than she had ever respected any flag or government. She walked with a heaviness that had nothing to do with her body. She had scars on her arms from shrapnel, and scars inside her head from everything else. Her hands were steady, though. They had always been steady. That was the one thing the war had given her that she decided to keep. The morning it all changed was a Tuesday in late September. The air was dry and tasted like iron, and the sun had barely cleared the horizon when Rena picked up the trail. She had been tracking a group of poachers for 3 days, men with heavy rifles and heavier debts who killed anything that could be sold. The reserve had lost 2 pangolins and a leopard in the past month, and Rena had taken it personally. She followed boot prints through scrub brush and dry riverbeds, moving low and quiet, the way the military had taught her. She carried her sidearm and a radio, and nothing else. She should have called for backup. She knew that. She also knew that backup was 2 hours away, and by then, whatever the poachers had caught would be dead. She found them in a clearing near a cluster of acacia trees. There were 5 of them, big men with automatic rifles and cold professional eyes. They had set wire snares in a line across a game trail, and one of those snares had caught something. It was a honey badger. The animal was maybe 10 kilograms of muscle and fury, and it was wrapped in wire that had cut deep into its neck and front legs. Blood matted its coarse black and silver fur. Its eyes were wild and black and absolutely unbroken. It was snarling and thrashing and biting at the wire with teeth that could crack a tortoise shell, and it would not stop fighting. It would never stop fighting. That was what honey badgers did. They fought until they won or they died, and sometimes they did both at the same time. The poachers were laughing. One of them poked at it with a stick and pulled back when the badger nearly took his finger off. Another was on a phone, probably arranging a sale, bush, meat, skin, trophy. It did not matter. The animal would be dead within the hour. Rena looked at the honey badger, and the honey badger looked at her. Something broke inside Rena's chest. Not the kind of breaking that hurts, the kind of breaking that sets something free. She stepped out of cover. She did not have a plan. She did not have odds in her favor. She had a pistol with 12 rounds against 5 men with automatic weapons, and the only thing standing between that animal and death was a woman who had already seen too much dying and had decided quite simply that she was not going to watch any more. "Leave it," she said. Her voice carried across the clearing, flat and hard, like a stone skipping over water. The poachers turned. 2 of them raised their rifles immediately. They were not amateurs. They had done this before, and they had killed before, and they could see in Rena's eyes that she was not going to walk away. The first shots came fast. Fired twice, and the closest man dropped. She fired again, and a second poacher spun and fell. Then the world became noise and pain and the smell of gunpowder and blood. She took 3 rounds to the torso. The impact was like being hit by a truck, and she staggered but did not fall. She took 2 more in her right leg, and she dropped to one knee. She kept firing. A bullet went through her left hand, and she felt the bones crack, but her finger was still on the trigger. A round grazed her skull, and her vision went white for a half-second, and then came back tinged with red. The last bullet hit her in the lower back, near her spine, and that was the one that finally brought her down. She fell forward over the snare, over the honey badger. Her body covered the animal like a shield, and her blood ran into the dust, and the red earth drank it, the way the Kalahari drinks everything. The remaining poachers ran. They were not brave men. They were men who hurt things that could not fight back. The thing that fought back was a woman with 8 bullets in her and still breathing. They wanted no part of it. The clearing went quiet. Rena could feel the honey badger beneath her, small and warm and trembling. Not with fear. Honey badgers did not feel fear. They trembled with rage. They trembled because they were still ready to fight. She understood that. She respected that. Her vision was fading. The sky above her was enormous and pale, and she thought distantly that the Kalahari was a good place to die if you had to die somewhere. She did not die. 600 kilometers above the Earth, hidden in a cloud of space debris that humanity had not yet learned to look through, a machine the size of a football watched everything. It was a Valoris Conclave observation drone, one of thousands scattered across young worlds, monitoring species that had not yet reached the stars. It had been watching Earth for 200 years, and in that time it had recorded wars and disasters and acts of extraordinary violence, and occasional confusing acts of kindness. But nothing like this. The drone's algorithms processed what it had seen, and it assigned the event a classification that had not been triggered in over 600 galactic cycles. Category 0 Empathic Combat Event. Non-reciprocal sacrifice for a non-sapient, non-bonded organism carrying no strategic value and no survival logic. Pure protective aggression motivated by nothing the algorithm could identify as rational self-interest. The drone transmitted its findings at faster-than-light speeds toward the nearest conclave relay station, and the message burned across the stars like a whisper that would change everything. Back on the ground, Rena bled. The honey badger chewed itself free of the snare. It was hurt and bleeding, and one of its legs was badly torn. But it did not run. It pressed itself against Rena's neck, where her pulse was slow and fading, and it stayed. Rena's colleague found her 6 hours later, following the sound of gunshots that had been reported by a distant farmer. She was gray and cold, and barely breathing. The paramedics loaded her into a helicopter, and one of them tried to remove the honey badger from her chest. The badger bit him so hard it broke skin through his glove. They flew her to the hospital, with the honey badger still on her chest, because nobody could get it off without risking further injury to Rena. She went into surgery. She went into a coma. And somewhere in the dark, empty space between stars, the message traveled onward, carrying the weight of a question the galaxy had not asked in a very long time. What kind of species does this? What kind of creature takes 8 bullets for an animal that would not even thank her? The answer was on its way, and it would arrive at Rena's doorstep sooner than anyone could have imagined. 3 weeks after the shooting, Rena Mofokeng opened her eyes in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and cheap flowers. Her body was a cathedral of pain. Every breath reminded her that 3 bullets had gone through her torso. Her right leg was held together with metal pins. Her left hand was wrapped in so much bandage it looked like a white club. And somewhere near her spine, a surgeon had spent 11 hours removing a bullet that had been 1 millimeter away from taking her legs forever. The first thing she said was not about herself. "The badger," she whispered to the nurse standing by her bed. "Did the badger make it?" The nurse, whose name was Grace, stared at her for a long moment, and then shook her head not in denial, but in disbelief. "The badger is alive," Grace said. "It is at the rehabilitation center. It will not leave. It sits by the fence every morning and screams at everyone. The staff have started calling it Sergeant." And something that might have been a smile crossed her cracked lips. "Good," she said. "That sounds right." The doctors told her she would walk again, but with a limp that would never fully go away. They told her the nerve damage in her left hand meant she would never have full grip strength again. They told her she was extraordinarily lucky to be alive. And Rena thought about the word lucky and decided it did not mean what the doctors thought it meant. She had not been lucky. She had been stubborn. There was a difference. 6,000 light-years away, aboard the Conclave adjudicator vessel, known as the Tenets of Flame, a very different kind of assessment was taking place. Fleet Commander Torvhan Zek stood in the observation chamber and watched the footage for the 17th time. Torvhan was Kethvori, one of the oldest martial species in the Valoris Conclave. 7 feet of layered chitin and dense muscle, with 4 arms that ended in hands capable of crushing stone and mandibles that could shear through ship hull plating. He was over 200 years old, by human counting, and he had fought in 11 campaigns, and he had earned every scar on his body the hard way. He was watching a small human woman step out of cover, with a pistol, against 5 armed men, to protect an animal that weighed less than his smallest arm. He could not stop watching it. The Valoris Conclave had governed the galaxy for longer than most species could remember. It was not an empire. It did not conquer. It was a coalition built on a single principle that had survived every war, and betrayal, and political crisis the galaxy had thrown at it. That principle was the Empathic Combat Index. The ECI measured something that most species found difficult to define, and even more difficult to perform. It measured the willingness of a being to fight, suffer, and die for something outside its own genetic, tribal, or species interest, with absolutely no expectation of reward or survival. Pack animals protected their pack. That scored low. Hive species sacrificed drones for the queen. That scored lower. Parent species died for their offspring. That was biology, not choice. The ECI measured choice. The conscious decision to bleed for something that could never pay you back. Most species in the Conclave averaged between 2 and 4 on the ECI scale. The Kethvori Torvan's own people averaged a 5.1, and they were considered one of the galaxy's great warrior cultures. The theoretical maximum was 10. No species had ever scored above 8 in a verified individual event. Rena Mofokeng's event had scored a 9.2. Torvan's second-in-command entered the chamber. Liaison Sereth was Uvesi, a slender reptilian species with 6 eyes and scales that shifted color with their emotional state. They were diplomats by nature, and they were very good at it. Sereth's scales were currently a troubled shade of amber. "Watched it again," Sereth said. "It was not a question. I have watched it again," Torvhan confirmed. "Commander, with respect, this is one individual, one event on one uncontacted world. The Conclave cannot assess an entire species based on a single data point, no matter how remarkable that data point may be." Torvhan turned from the display. His massive frame made the chamber feel small. "You are correct," he said. "One event is not enough, which is why I pulled the broader data set." He activated the secondary display, and the chamber filled with images and footage and data streams spanning centuries of passive observation of Earth. A soldier in a place called Normandy, throwing himself onto a grenade to save men he had known for only 3 weeks. A woman in a country called Japan, running back into a burning building to rescue a dog that was not hers. A man in a place called Australia, wrestling a crocodile to free a stranger's child. Collapsing towers, knowing they would not walk out. Humans forming bonds with wolves, with lions, with elephants, with creatures that could kill them, and calling those bonds love. And scattered through the data like bright threads in dark cloth, hundreds of recorded instances of humans risking death for animals that offered them nothing in return. No loyalty, no utility, no biological imperative, just a compulsion that the Conclave's algorithms could not classify under any known behavioral model. Sereth watched the data scroll past. Their scales slowly shifted from amber to pale white, which among the Yevesi indicated profound shock. "They do this regularly," Sareth said quietly. "They do this so regularly," Torvhan replied, "that they argue about whether they should. The fact that the argument exists means enough of them keep doing it that it must be argued about." "Do you understand what that means, Sareth?" Sareth understood. They did not want to understand, but they did. "It means it is not cultural," Sareth said. "It is not trained. It is not doctrine. It is something in their basic nature. Something that makes them run toward the thing that is going to kill them if there is something helpless on the other side." Torfan nodded slowly. "I am requesting a first contact valor assessment," he said. "The first in 200 cycles. I want a delegation sent to the surface, to the female specifically. She is the trigger point. She is where we begin." Sareth's scales flickered through several colors in rapid succession, which was the Yevesi equivalent of a deep sigh. "The Conclave will have concerns," they said. "The Conclave always has concerns. That is what the Conclave does. I am asking them to do something else for once. I am asking them to pay attention." The request was transmitted through official channels, and it moved through the Conclave's bureaucracy with unusual speed, because Torvhan Zek did not make requests lightly. And because the footage spoke for itself, the authorization came back within 6 cycles. A delegation would be assembled. A ship would be sent. The target was a small blue world on the outer arm of an unremarkable spiral galaxy, and the specific destination was a wildlife rehabilitation center on the edge of a desert, where a woman with 8 bullet wounds was learning to walk again, and a honey badger named Sergeant was waiting by a fence every morning, screaming at the sun. Back on Earth, Rena had no idea what was coming. She was focused on smaller things, learning to grip a cup with her damaged hand, walking 10 meters without stopping to breathe through the pain, watching from her hospital window as the Kalahari stretched out red and gold and endless under skies that she had always thought were empty. 6 weeks after she woke from the coma, Rena was sitting on the porch of her small homestead, watching the sun come up over the Kalahari. Her body was a map of what had happened to her. 3 scars on her torso, where surgeons had gone in after the bullets. 2 on her right leg, where metal pins held bone together. A twisted knot of healed tissue on her left hand, where a round had gone clean through. A thin white line along her skull, where death had kissed her and moved on. And deep in her lower back, a constant dull ache where the last bullet had come closest to taking everything. She could walk now, slowly and with a limp that the doctor said would be permanent. She could grip things with her left hand if she concentrated. She could lift a cup of coffee, and she could hold a rifle, though her aim would never be what it was. These were the things she had. These were enough. Sergeant the honey badger was eating scrambled eggs from a metal bowl near her feet. He ate with the honey badger bread. Intensity and aggression that honey badgers brought to everything in their lives, as though the eggs might fight back, and he needed to be ready. The rehabilitation center staff had tried to release him 3 times. He had come back every time. The 3rd time he had broken into Rena's house through a window screen and fallen asleep on her bed. She had stopped trying to release him after that. Some bonds were not chosen. They simply happened, and you either respected them or you spent your life fighting something that was never going to give up. It was a Tuesday. The sky was clear and pale, and the air smelled like dust and dry grass, and everything was quiet. Then the light came. It descended from the sky without sound. A column of white brilliance that touched the earth 200 meters from her porch, and where it met the ground, something took shape. A craft of some kind, geometric and shimmering, with surfaces that seemed to fold into themselves in ways that made Rena's eyes water. When she tried to focus on them, it settled onto the red earth gently, almost politely, and the light faded, and the craft simply sat there as though it had always been part of the landscape. Rena's hand went to the rifle leaning against the wall beside her chair. Sergeant stopped eating. His small black eyes locked onto the craft, and his fur rose along his spine, and he made a sound that was somewhere between a growl and a declaration of war. A door opened in the side of the craft, though Rena could not see where the seams had been a moment ago. 3 figures emerged and walked toward her homestead with measured, careful steps. The first was enormous, 7 feet tall at least, with a body covered in layered plates of dark chitin that gleamed like wet obsidian in the morning light. 4 arms, 2 folded across a broad chest, and 2 hanging at its sides, ending in hands that looked like they could crush rocks. He moved with the deliberate precision of something that was constantly aware of how much damage it could do to the world around it, and was choosing not to. His face was a collection of angular planes and deep-set eyes that burned amber, and mandibles that framed a mouth built for tearing. He wore armor, real armor, not decorative, battle plate that had been scored and dented and repaired so many times it told a story all by itself. This was Fleet Commander Torvan Jek of the HFY. The second figure was smaller and moved like water, slender and covered in fine scales that shifted color as they walked, ranging from deep green to silver to something that had no name in any human language. 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows blinked independently, and with an intelligence that was immediately obvious. They carried no weapons. Their posture radiated calm the way a river radiates calm right before you realize how deep it is. This was Liaison Sereth of the Avesi. The third figure made Rena's breath catch, but because it was familiar, compact and powerfully built, covered in dense dark fur, with a broad flat head and small fierce eyes, and a body that moved with the coiled energy of something that was always ready to fight. It looked like someone had taken a wolverine and a bear and combined them and then given the result a quiet, dangerous intelligence. This was Warden Keel of the Marathi, the species with the highest empathic combat index in the galaxy, the most respected warrior guardians the Conclave had ever known. Keel was looking at Sergeant. Sergeant was looking at Keel. Neither of them blinked. Rena stood slowly. Her leg protested, and her back sent a sharp line of pain up her spine. But she stood because she had been a soldier, and soldiers stood when strangers approached, whether those strangers were human or something else entirely. "That is close enough," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hand was near the rifle. Sereth stopped. "With them." When Sereth spoke, it was in Sesotho, Rena's first language. Perfect Sesotho with an accent that sounded like wind moving through dry grass. "Rena Mofokeng, we are not here to harm you. We are not here to take anything. We are not here to study you or your world. We are here because of what you did." Rena said nothing. She waited. Sereth explained. They explained the Valoris Conclave and the 4,000 species that comprised it. They explained the empathic combat index and what it measured. They explained the observation drones and the fact that Earth had been watched for centuries. They explained that Rena's act in that clearing had triggered a classification that the galaxy had not seen in over 600 cycles. They explained that she had scored a 9.2 on a scale where most species averaged a 3. Rena listened to all of it. Her face did not change. When Sereth finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I did not do it for a score." Behind Sereth Torvan, Jek made a sound. A deep, resonant vibration that came from somewhere inside his massive chest. It was a sound that the HFY used to express something that existed in the space between laughter and reverence, between amusement and awe. He turned to Sereth. "Translate that exactly," he said. "Every delegation in the conclave needs to hear those words exactly as she said them." Sereth continued. "The conclave wanted to open relations with humanity," they explained. "But not through governments, not through politicians or generals or diplomats. The conclave's tradition required that first contact be made through the individual whose act triggered the assessment. They were offering Rena the title of Threshold Guardian, Earth's first representative to the galactic community. A voice for her entire species. Rena looked at them for a long time. Then she looked at her damaged hand and her scarred body and her small homestead on the edge of a desert. "No," she said. "I am a ranger. I am not a diplomat. I have a limp and a bad hand and a honey badger that bites everyone. I am not what you need." Silence. Then Keel moved. The Marathi warden stepped forward past Sereth, past Torvin, and stopped in front of Rena. Keel looked at Sergeant, who was puffed up to twice his normal size, and hissing with the full fury of his 11-kilogram body. Then Keel looked at Rena. When Keel spoke, his voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. "On my world, we have a creature like this one, small and fearless. It fights everything. We tried to tame them for 1,000 years. They refused, so we learned to respect them instead. Your creature is the same." Keel paused, and then he did something that made Torvin go absolutely still. Keel knelt. Marathi did not kneel. Marathi knelt for no one. This was known across the conclave. It was not pride. It was simply that the Marathi believed kneeling was sacred, and sacred things were not done lightly. Keel knelt in the red dust of the Kalahari and looked up at Rena Mofokeng. "We are not asking you to be a diplomat," Keel said. "We are asking you to be what you already are." Rena stared at the alien warrior kneeling in her dust. She looked at Torvan standing like a mountain behind him. She looked at Sereth, whose scales had turned a color she could not name, but that somehow looked like hope. She looked at Sergeant. Sergeant had stopped hissing. He had walked over to Sereth's satchel, which the diplomat had set on the ground, and he was pulling an egg-shaped object out of it with his teeth. "He is stealing from your bag," Rena said to Sereth. Sereth looked down. "That is a diplomatic data crystal, worth more than your dwelling. He thinks it is food. Should I retrieve it? I would not recommend that." Rena watched her honey badger try to eat an alien artifact, and she felt something shift inside. Her chest. Not breaking this time. Something settling into place, like a bone finally finding its socket, after being dislocated for years. "Fine," she said. "I will do it. But he comes with me." She pointed at Sergeant. "Everywhere." Keel rose from the dust, and there was something in his dark, fierce eyes that looked very much like joy. "I would have it no other way," he said. The Axis was the largest structure Rena had ever seen, and she suspected it was the largest structure anyone had ever seen. It hung at the gravitational center of the galaxy, a megastructure built over millennia by species that had mastered physics the way Rena had mastered wound care. Its corridors stretched for thousands of kilometers, and its chambers held atmospheres tailored to every known biology, and its population at any given moment numbered in the billions. Rena walked through it with a limp and a honey badger, and the quiet certainty that she did not belong here. 3 months had passed since the aliens had landed in her yard. 3 months of preparation and briefing and argument with human governments who could not decide whether first contact was a miracle or a threat. 3 months of learning to navigate a galaxy that operated on rules she was still struggling to understand. She had a small advisory team with her now, 6 humans selected not by governments, but by Rena herself, a linguist, a doctor, a former Marine turned disaster relief coordinator, a wildlife biologist, an engineer, an elementary school teacher from Johannesburg, who Rena had chosen because the woman had a gift for explaining complicated things in simple words, and because Rena believed the galaxy needed more teachers and fewer politicians. Sergeant rode on Rena's shoulder in a specially made harness. He had bitten 2 conclave officials during the journey, and had attempted to fight a cleaning drone. He was in an excellent mood. The Great Assembly Chamber was designed to hold representatives of all 4,000 conclave species, and when Rena entered it, she understood for the first time how small Earth was. Thousands of beings filled the chamber in rising tiers of seats and platforms and suspension fields, adapted to every body type. Creatures of crystal, and creatures of shadow, and creatures that floated, and creatures that burrowed, and creatures so large they needed their own gravity wells, and creatures so small they attended as collectives of millions. Some were beautiful by any standard, and some were terrifying, and most were simply alien in ways that the human brain could process only as strange. They were all watching her. Sareth walked beside her, translating the whispers that rippled through the chamber as Rena made her way to the speaking platform. Curiosity from the younger species, skepticism from the older ones, outright hostility from a few. The hostility had a source, and that source stood at the opposing platform, waiting for her. Primus Vold of the Drael hegemony. The Drael were tall and angular, with skin like polished gray metal, and eyes that held no warmth at all. They were one of the Conclave's most powerful member species, and they had achieved that power through cold calculation and absolute efficiency. Their ECI average was 1.3, the lowest of any spacefaring species in the Conclave. Consider this a flaw. They considered empathy a cognitive error, a biological malfunction that impaired decision-making and wasted resources. Vold spoke first, as was his right under Conclave protocol. His voice carried through the chamber, translated simultaneously into 4,000 languages. I come before this assembly to formally object to the inclusion of the human species in the Valoris Conclave. He activated his own data displays, and the chamber filled with images from Earth. Wars, genocides, the trenches of the First World War, the mushroom clouds over Japan, mass graves in Rwanda, factories where animals were raised in cages so small they could not turn around, oil spreading across dying oceans, children working in mines, forests burning. This is what they are, Vold said. This is not a species defined by empathy. This is a species defined by selective violence. They protect what makes them feel good, and they destroy everything else. Principle. It is impulse. It is narcissism dressed in noble clothing. He let the images hang in the air. One individual performed one act. This assembly would grant an entire species membership based on a single emotional outburst. I say this is sentiment, not evidence. I say this species has not earned its place here. I say it never will. The chamber was quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when a large number of beings are thinking the same uncomfortable thought. Rena's advisory team was panicking. She could feel it. The linguist was whispering frantically about prepared statements. The former Marine was clenching his jaw. The teacher from Johannesburg was gripping her own hand so hard her knuckles had gone white. Rena had no prepared remarks. She had refused to write any. Sareth had begged her to prepare something, and she had said that she did not know how to be anyone other than who she was, and that if that was not enough, then it was not enough. Stood. The chamber shifted its attention to her. 4,000 species, 8,000 eyes, and more watching a limping woman with a scarred hand and a honey badger on her shoulder. She spoke in Sesotho, and Sareth translated in real time. "He is right," Rena said. The chamber stirred. Sareth's scales flickered in surprise, but they translated faithfully. "Everything he showed you is true. We have done all of those things and worse. We are not consistent, we are not reliable, we are not safe. We fail. We fail constantly, and we fail in ways that are so terrible that we cannot look at our own history without flinching." She paused and looked across the chamber at the thousands of beings watching her. "But I need to ask you something. Your metric, the empathic combat index, it flagged me because I stepped in front of bullets for an animal that could not help itself. You thought that was remarkable. You scored it a 9.2, And I need you to understand something. Her voice was steady, the way it had been steady in the clearing when she told the poachers to leave. Where I come from, what I did is not unusual. People back home called me stupid for doing it. Do you understand that? On my world, the debate is not whether someone would take bullets for a helpless creature. The debate is whether they should. That argument exists because enough of us keep doing it that it has to be argued about. She let that settle. You want to know what humans are? We are the species that keeps jumping in front of the thing that is going to kill us, and then arguing about it afterward. We are the species that runs into burning buildings and dives into frozen rivers and fights animals 10 times our size because something small and scared needed help. We do not do it because it is logical. We do not do it because it is safe. We do it because something inside us will not let us walk away. She looked directly at Vold. You showed them our worst. You are right to show it. They should see it. But you left something out. You left out the part where we look at our worst and we are disgusted by it. You left out the part where we build courts to punish the ones who commit atrocities, and we write laws to protect the ones who cannot protect themselves, and we teach our children that cruelty is wrong, even when our own history is full of it. We are not Gudeli. We are not fixed. We are not finished. She raised her damaged hand, the one with the bullet scar. We are trying, and we will not stop trying, because that is also what we are. The chamber was silent. Then Warden Keel stood. The Marathi warden rose from his seat among the martial delegations, and his voice carried across the chamber with the weight of 1,000 years of warrior tradition. I invoke the right of martial bond. I pledge the Marathi to stand beside humanity in war and in peace. From this day, their enemies are our enemies. Their cause is our cause. Their blood is our blood. The chamber erupted. Martial bonds were sacred and rare, and for the Marathi to pledge one to an untested species was unprecedented. Torvhan rose next. His massive form cast shadows across the delegations around him. The Kethvori second this bond, he said. We have watched this species. We have measured them, not just in one act, but in 10,000 acts across their history. They fight for things that cannot fight for themselves, and they do it knowing they will probably die. That is not narcissism, Primus Vault. That is the definition of valor. The vote was called. It was not unanimous. It was not even comfortable. The margin was narrow, and the Drell recorded their formal protest, and there were species who voted yes out of curiosity rather than conviction. But it passed. Humanity was admitted to the Valoris Conclave. In the aftermath, as delegates filed out, and the chamber buzzed with conversation and debate, Sargent, who had been remarkably calm throughout the proceedings, chose this moment to leap from Rena's shoulder onto the platform of a nearby delegate. The delegate was of Vressian, a large amphibious being with a famously short temper. Sargent bit them on what was probably a hand. The security response involved 11 officers and took 20 minutes because Sargent fought every single one of them. The incident was recorded in the official conclave proceedings under the heading Diplomatic Event of Note, and within a week it had become the most viewed recording in the conclave's public archive. Keel watched the footage later and laughed for the first time in 40 years. That creature, he said to Rena, is the most honest diplomat I have ever seen. Rena looked at Sargent, who was eating a stolen piece of Vressian ceremonial fruit with absolutely no remorse. He is a honey badger, she said. This is what they do. 14 months after a woman in the Kalahari took 8 bullets for a honey badger, the galaxy learned what humans did when the cost was real. The world was called Vetha, a blue and green planet orbiting a dying star in a system that most conclave maps did not bother to label. Its dominant species were the Suliri, small semi-aquatic beings with translucent skin and large dark eyes, and voices that sounded like water running over glass. They had not yet discovered fire in the way that most species understood it, but they had built cities of coral and living plants beneath their shallow seas, and they sang songs to each other that carried for hundreds of kilometers through the water. They were gentle, and they were beautiful, and they were going to die. The star that warmed their world was expanding, a stellar phenomenon that would render Vetha uninhabitable within a decade. The Suliri did not have the technology to understand what was happening. They only knew that their oceans were warming, and their coral was bleaching, and their children were getting sick, and the songs were getting shorter. The Drell hegemony had known about this for years. They had mining operations on Vetha's outer moon, extracting rare minerals, and they had calculated that evacuating the Suliri would cost more than the species was worth by any economic measure. Volt had argued before the conclave that the Suliri were sub-threshold, not sapient enough to warrant intervention, not valuable enough to save. The conclave debated, the way the conclave always debated. Committees were formed, reports were filed, timelines were proposed that stretched beyond the point where timelines would matter. Torvald came to Rena privately in her quarters aboard the Axis. "This is aimed at you," he said. His amber eyes were steady, but there was something behind them that looked like anger held on a very short leash. "The Drell engineered this crisis to be your test. They want to see what happens when protecting the helpless costs more than a few bullets. They want to see if humanity's empathy has a price tag." Rena looked at the data on the Suliri, their cities, their songs, their children, with translucent fingers reaching for a sky they did not know was killing them. "How many?" she asked. 1.2 million. "How long do we have?" 8 months before the oceanic temperature rise becomes lethal. Rena was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that Torvald would later record in his personal log as the moment he understood humans completely. "I cannot speak for Earth's governance. They are still arguing about whether aliens are real. I cannot promise warships or funding or political support." "Then what can you promise?" "People." She sent a signal, not through official channels, not through the conclave's diplomatic networks. She sent it through every open communication channel that reached Earth, translated into every human language. "There is a species called the Suliri. They are small and gentle, and they sing to each other across oceans. Their world is dying. They cannot save themselves. No one else is coming. I am asking for volunteers." She expected hundreds. She got thousands. They came through the conclave transit gates in waves. Firefighters from Brazil and Japan and Canada. Doctors from India and Nigeria and Germany. Combat engineers from the United States and South Korea and Australia. Disaster relief workers who had rebuilt after earthquakes and hurricanes and tsunamis, and who looked at an alien ocean world and said, "Yes, we can work with this." Wildlife rescue teams who had spent their lives saving creatures that could not ask for help, and who saw no difference between a stranded whale and a stranded alien child. 12,000 humans arrived on Vetha within 6 weeks. They were not trained for this. They did not speak Suliri. Technology the conclave provided. They were underfunded and undersupplied, and many of them had given up everything they had to come here. Jobs, homes, relationships. They came anyway because a woman with a limp and a honey badger had asked, and because something inside them would not let them say no. The Drell watched from their observation vessels and waited for humanity to fail. Humanity did not fail. It was ugly and chaotic and exhausting and deeply imperfect, but it worked. Engineers rigged alien atmospheric processors with human ingenuity and creative profanity, figuring out technology they had never seen through trial and error and sheer stubbornness. Doctors treated Suliri patients using medical scanners they had learned to operate 3 days earlier, adapting on the fly, inventing solutions in real time, the way humans always did when the situation demanded more than the plan had prepared for. Volunteers waded into rising waters to carry Soleri families to evacuation points. They carried children on their backs and elderly on stretchers, and they sang to them, because someone had discovered that the Soleri responded to music, and that human voices, even rough, untrained human voices, could calm a terrified Soleri child enough to get them onto a transport. Keel and the Marathi worked alongside the humans. Torvhan brought a Kethvori engineering corps that built evacuation infrastructure at a pace that impressed even the humans. Other species began to arrive quietly. Small delegations from worlds that had voted against humanity's admission, who came not with official sanction, but because their own people had seen the footage and demanded to help. Because there was footage everywhere. The Conclave's communication networks were flooded with images of humans on Vetha. A firefighter from Sao Paulo carrying 3 Soleri children through chest-deep water, laughing through his exhaustion. A surgeon from Mumbai performing an emergency procedure on a Soleri elder, using tools she had modified with tape and wire and prayers. A group of volunteers forming the human chain across a flooded canyon to pass Soleri families from one side to the other, hand to hand to hand. And then there was the footage that broke the Conclave's viewership records. A Drell observation vessel fired on a human transport convoy. Officially, it was classified as a navigational error. The blast killed 3 humans instantly and critically injured 7 more. The convoy scattered, and in the chaos, a cluster of Soleri evacuation pods drifted into open water, where the currents would carry them into a thermal zone that would cook them alive. Rena was on the ground when it happened. She took a plasma graze across her torso, adding a new scar to the collection that already decorated her body. She did not stop. She grabbed her rescue skiff and went after the pods, and she pulled them back one by one with her damaged hand and her permanent limp and a fury in her eyes that the troopers would recognize. Soleri would later incorporate into their songs as the fire that does not burn. Sargent was there too. The Marathi had built him an environmental suit, a tiny pressurized outfit designed for his exact dimensions, with reinforced plating, because they understood what he was and they respected it. He looked ridiculous and he did not care. When a Drail reconnaissance drone descended to a low altitude over the evacuation zone, Sargent launched himself at it from the top of a supply crate. He hit the drone at full speed, latched onto its sensor array with his jaws, and rode it into a drainage ditch where it crashed in a shower of sparks and mud. Sargent emerged from the wreckage, covered in mud and sparking circuitry, with a piece of the drone's antenna still in his mouth. The footage went viral across 4,000 worlds. The Marathi High Council formally requested a copy for their war archives. They classified Sargent as an honorary combat warden, the first non-Marathi organism to receive the designation in their species history. The evacuation took 5 months. It was grueling and heartbreaking, and 3 more humans died in the effort, 1 in a structural collapse, 1 from an equipment malfunction, 1 who drowned pulling a Soleri family from the submerged dwelling, and who was found still holding the smallest child above the waterline. But they did it. All 1.2 million Soleri were evacuated to a new world provided by the Conclave, a world with warm, shallow seas and clean light, and room to build new cities of coral and song. The Drell's objection collapsed. The species that had called humanity narcissistic and selectively violent watched 12,000 humans cross the galaxy to save a species they had never met and could never repay. And the argument simply fell apart under the weight of what had happened. Species that had been skeptical of humanity's admission sent quiet messages of acknowledgement. More than acknowledgement. The Yevesi opened full diplomatic relations. The Kethvari expanded their martial bond. The Marathi composed a war song about Rena and the evacuation of Vetha. It had 47 verses. Verse 12 was entirely about Sargent. It was considered by Marathi critics to be the finest verse in the composition. On the last day of the evacuation, Rena sat on the porch of a temporary shelter on Vetha's highest coastal ridge, watching the final transport rise into the sky, carrying the last Suliri families to their new home. Keel sat beside her. His fur was matted with salt water, and his suit was dented, and he looked as tired as she had ever seen him. Sargent was asleep in Rena's lap, still wearing his environmental suit, which was cracked and mud-caked, and missing one leg plate. "Do you regret it?" Keel asked. "Any of it?" Rena watched the transport disappear into the clouds. She thought about the clearing in the Kalahari and the wire snare. She thought about the aliens on her doorstep, and the chamber of 4,000 species, and the Suliri children who had held her hands with their small translucent fingers, and had not wanted to let go. "Ask me something hard," she said. Keel made that rare rough sound that was his version of laughter. "Your creature is still wearing the suit," he said. "He likes it. Makes him feel important," she replied. "He destroyed a military drone. He is a honey badger. That is just Tuesday." Below them on the shore, a Suliri child stood at the water's edge, looking up at the sky where the last transport had vanished. The child turned and saw Rena sitting on the ridge, and raised one small translucent hand in a wave. Rena waved back. She was a ranger from the Kalahari with a limp and a bad hand, and a honey badger that fought everything. And she had somehow become the bridge between her species and the stars. And she had done it not with speeches or strategy or political skill, but with the only thing she had ever really had: the willingness to bleed for something that could not bleed for itself. The galaxy was vast and old, and full of beings who measured worth in equations and efficiency, and cold rational calculation. And then there were humans, who measured it in the things they were willing to stand in front of. Torvald Jek would write in his personal log that night a single entry that would be quoted in conclave academies for centuries after. "I have studied 10,000 species across 600 cycles of recorded history. I have seen civilizations rise and fall, and rise again. I have seen empires built on logic, and empires built on strength, and empires built on fear. None of them lasted. The humans will last, not because they are strong or smart or logical, but because they are the species that cannot walk past something in pain. They will tear themselves apart over it. They will argue and fail and stumble, bleed, but they will not walk past. And that is the most dangerous and the most beautiful thing in the galaxy." Somewhere on a new world, a Suliri child sang a song it had learned from a human volunteer. A simple melody with no words, that the volunteer had hummed while carrying the child through rising water. The song carried across the shallow sea, and other children picked it up, and soon the whole coast was singing. It was not a Suliri song, and it was not a human song. It was something new, and it was just the beginning.